I'm really looking forward to this next conversation. We did a pre-production call a couple of weeks ago that went for about an hour, and I couldn't get these guys to shut up. And I thought if I had just recorded this conversation, we could have run it for you because it was especially entertaining. And these two guys have been in the business a long time, and I think we might get a little bit into baseball, but I think you're ready for that. We're going to have a conversation with Bob Lord, the CEO of Razorfish, and Rob Norman, CEO of GroupM North America. Welcome. Bob, Rob, John. Great to see you. Lovely to see you too. Good John.
Can I start by saying the word Adidas?
Adidas.
It's on the same theme as
Nokia.
Yeah,
Nokia,
exactly.
Adidas. And I also screwed up Ann Lewin's name earlier, so just do the opposite of what I do when it comes to any brand or last name. I want to start with you guys, and we didn't even talk about this on the phone, but can you guys just tell folks gathered here what you do? Because you can't assume that everybody knows, and as someone in the business for 25 years, it's very confusing to me because you guys change the names of your agencies like every 6 months.
We don't.
And you reorganize every quarter.
Yeah.
So start with you, Bob.
Yeah.
Because you have a new owner.
Yes. We have a new owner.
And after a protracted bidding process where you separated from Microsoft. So tell us kind of what you do.
So I think if you boil it down, it's pretty simple. We just try to get to consumers to engage in the products differently than they ever have before. So what it's called and how we do it, that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to get consumer engagement at a different level. So whether you say it's traditional media, whether you say it's social media, or whether you say it's whatever, it's about engaging with the consumer to get them to do something that they normally wouldn't do.
Now, let me ask, in terms of Razorfish's suite of services,
Yep.
Is there a focus, or do you draw a circle around what you do and say this is what we do as opposed to this is what we don't do?
Yeah, so Razorfish specifically is in the business of helping clients transform their business through digital. And basically what that means is we focus on the experiential side of a consumer's interaction with the brand. So we take from brand perception into brand reality. That's what we're all about. So about 1/3 of our staff are technologists, which is incredibly unique in this business. And the reason why we have about 1/3 of our staff and technologists is because they're the folks that are actually bringing the brand to life, helping the brand to express itself in any venue. Now, just listening this morning, everyone knows there's lots of different venues to bring these brands to life. And our focus is all about making sure that the brand lives up to the promise. So the blue shirt promise that Best Buy has, when you walk into the store, do the blue shirts live up to that promise? Apple is probably the best example of how that promise comes to life when you walk into the store, you open up a box, people are delighted. That's the business we're in.
Got it. Now, Rob, what business are you in, and is it the same business?
I have a 31-minute, 36-second answer to this question. I have the aid of the clock
It's
here
a big
to
clock
tell me
here.
that.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going to go off at that point.
So I really liked them when they were Avenue A and independent. I kind of liked them quite a lot when they were a subsidiary of Microsoft. I like them way less.
Now that they're a subsidiary of...
Yeah, exactly. The other guy, as we refer to them.
Well, this is why I put you guys on stage.
Yeah, okay. So when I think about what business we're in, I'll kind of give you the WPP view and then tell you where my bit fits into it. I think WPP is a very complex organism, but we're really in 3 businesses. We create messages and experiences for brands and corporations. We distribute messages and experiences for brands and corporations, and we kind of measure the effectiveness of those things. And by and large, our agency businesses are in the creating bucket. GroupM, Mindshare, MediaCom, MediaEd, CIA, and Maxis. My little family who I work for is in the distribution business. And Kantar with Dynamic Logic, Millward Brown, and TNS, and all of those guys are by and large in the measurement business. So that's kind of the broad strokes. Now, clearly, it's not a pure play, so we have intersections with creation and distribution when it comes with things like branded content and social media, and intersection between distribution and measurement when it comes to business science, modeling, and so on and so forth. But the heart of my business is to work with others to take the experience that have been created and make sure those are distributed with the greatest possible efficiency. That's the heart of my business.
Got it. Now, agency models are changing, and at least that's what I read. And
write about.
Every so often I write that as well. So talk to me about, let me put it in basic terms. What keeps you up at night? You guys run very large, very important agencies. What do you worry about?
I once asked the CMO of Red Bull that very question.
You should answer them. What did he say?
He's Austrian.
I think what worries me at this point is the rapid rate of the technology advancements and keeping in touch and participating in the conversation with the consumer. Because I think it's developing so rapidly now. As an agency partner, you have the responsibility to your client to keep them at the forefront, to make sure that they're testing and they're learning. And the question is, what are you testing? What are you learning from? And convincing them that part of the $100 that they spend for you, 10% of that $100 should be going towards experimentation. And it probably will fail. Of the 6 things you end up experimenting with, it'll fail.
Do you worry about getting shot for those failures?
Well, I think in some cultures there's that propensity to do that, or to cut the budget out, and in the long run, then they are lost. So how do you know when the next Foursquare is going to come? Or what do you do with Foursquare now, and how do you test with them? And if it fails in one of the big markets, what does that mean for you as an agency because you came forward in the record, or you came forward with that idea? But then again, you can hit a Facebook or some other app like Sticky Bits. What do you do with Sticky Bits, right? Do you go out on a limb and you sort of say Sticky Bits is the next best thing for Campbell's soup because of X, Y, and Z? So those are the kinds of things I think that there's so much happening so quickly. And I actually think the second part of that is getting people to come into the agency who are digital natives, who are growing up in this environment that can bring you those ideas. I remember years and years ago when we had brought in a new recruit and we were planning this campaign for a large hotel chain, and he said, well, let's just put the pictures up on Flickr. And everyone looked around at each other like, what the hell is Flickr? Okay, same analogy now. You wouldn't even think twice about what Flickr is. Same analogy is for the new stuff out there. So the challenge I think we have specifically is attracting those people to come in to keep the agency sharp.
Right.
I think the people thing's a really big challenge, and I've said this before. The media side, my side of the advertising business, has long been a home for liberal arts graduates who are somewhat numerate, and
somewhat numerate.
Yeah, and now my challenge is
Someone please tweet that.
Now finding math graduates that can write in whole paragraphs and.
Preferably with sentences.
Well, I've lowered my expectations on punctuation.
Bullet points would work.
Yeah. You'll not see a trailing gerund in our office anytime soon, I can tell you. But, and that's a kind of really big issue for us. I think that the other issue for us is not just innovation, but innovation at scale. Because most of the people we deal with and most of the people that pay Bob's bills are people that are selling millions, if not billions of dollars worth or units of something. And it's extraordinarily important that we maintain the momentum of those businesses. And when we do innovate, we apply critical faculties to that innovation to determine which of those innovations are likely to have either large reach, are likely to induce some kind of cultural shift in behavior, and indeed catalyze other behaviors that bring things together. And maintaining a level of perspective rather than having an obsession with newness for newness' sake is somewhat challenging, given that we want also to encourage our people and our clients, to your point, to be experimental at the margin of the operation.
Now, when we spoke earlier, you made the point that your businesses were built previously on sort of exchanging money for exposure.
Yeah.
And you said now you're buying outcomes
Yeah.
as opposed to exposure. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, no, I think our clients, instead of, you go back, I mean, whether you look at TV, the number of views, or you look at number of clicks on an internet site, I mean, clients now want to pay you based on, and we haven't really gotten there yet all the way, but clients want to pay on whether or not a hotel room was booked, whether or not we sold a car in a storefront, in a showroom. They don't want to know dwell time. They don't want to know how many fans they have. How many views there were. They want to know whether or not their product had moved. Now, I think the interesting challenge on that is when we set up our arrangements. Normally, in the past, and even currently today, we're either set up on a commission structure or on a retainer relationship, where people book a number of people and they pay us on an hourly basis. I think the world has to move into performance-based marketing, or performance-based payment, which is basically if I sell more cars, that the agency benefits just as much as the consumer, as much as the advertiser benefits. And I think that's where the world has to shift. We have to get back to the world where the agencies are considered agency partners, and they're in it with the client to succeed for their business.
When I made the remark about paying for exposure rather than outcomes and how that shift is changing, I think the remark I was making had more to do with the way that the transactions are executed between agencies and media owners rather than perhaps with the motivations of the parties. I think clients have always spent their shareholders' money with an eye on outcomes. And I think there's two sides to the change. The first is that we've become much more focused now, because there's more direct connection points, on trying to identify revenue events that occur when consumers and marketers touch each other. What I mean by that is that it's really easy in binary situations like I'm selling a travel insurance policy to determine a revenue event because it's the sale. But what I'm also trying to do is back further out into the various touch points and say, so the car example's an obvious one. If there's a million visitors to FordVehicles.com and you sell 10,000 cars, yet there's 500,000 to LincolnMercury.com, smaller number, the conversion rate is higher. As you go down that funnel, for want of a better word, and move through to the people that did online car configurators, the people that filled in loan applications, the people that test drove, you can identify different kinds of revenue events that you can drive people to. And so what I'm trying to do, or what we're trying to do as a business, is have a much more accurate view of what those revenue events are, which allows us to an extent to shift the basis of the negotiation either covertly or overtly with our media partners to more accurately tie impressions and actions to outcomes.
Do you believe that has become a defensible science? In other words, as a publisher, I'll just ask on behalf of all of us, this scares the crud out of us. There's a part of us that says, well, we have an audience and, we're in the job of engaging with them. On the other hand, you may be representing a product that they don't necessarily understand well enough, and at what point do we get credit for consideration as opposed to conversion?
I mean, somewhere between last-click attribution and no-click attribution lies truth in all of this. And I think that some of the work that Quantiv did during the Microsoft interregnum, or the Regency period, as it would be known in English historical
the Regency period.
Contest. I always remember when Kevin Johnson described the acquisition of a Quantiv as the most expensive lottery ticket anyone ever purchased, and then went on to make a remark about why Microsoft find it difficult to integrate large acquisitions. And someone said, you have to draw the distinction between large acquisitions and expensive ones. And it was kind of helpful.
It was expensive.
It was, for sure. Well, or good value if you were an Quantiv shareholder. But I do believe that we are capable, and clients are capable intellectually and intelligently, of looking at both of those things. One of the advantages we have is we have a 10-year history of understanding attributions based on clicks, and we have a 50-year history on understanding how different kinds of consumer communication change the hearts and minds of people. And there is no question that we are working on hybrids of those. But I think that the diagnostics we have with people's interaction with social platforms and their own owned media properties from media that is, broadly speaking, in the perception-changing business, are good indicators.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's a kind of binary relationship.
Do you see a time when you will start to take data, feeds and APIs from publishers as part of the input process to how you make real-time decisions about marketing on those publishers'
Oh,
sites?
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, you have to take it from both sides. I think you have to take, actually, when we go out and we talk to our publishers, a lot of times our technologists are with us to figure out how we can get those feeds in. So we have those feeds, and then we can actually measure along the, as Rob's saying, the funnel. But then you want to tie in the back-end data of the client and figure out how many hotels rooms were sold. And actually, that's normally the hardest part, is actually
getting data out of your client.
Out of the client sometimes, because they normally have their own research and analytics department, and they're sort of like, no, we'll take care of that. But you got to somehow wed the two together. Now, the great stuff that's coming out with the barcodes, ideas, and Foursquare, having that information actually sometimes is now even challenging what are these big CRM systems that these clients are building, right? Because if you can truly get to this one-on-one marketing, and when someone walks into Macy's and they check into Foursquare and I serve them down a coupon, I now have tracked everything that they've done, okay? And do you put more effort and money into that and doing the real-time stuff than looking back into the past in your CRM database? Because then you can start doing email marketing and everything off of that database of information. So it's a really interesting place to be with this location-based services, location-based e-commerce, and advertising.
I think what we're seeing with all the data is an increasing need to understand what long-term effective marketing means and what short-term effective marketing means. And I think the example you just gave is really interesting, and I think that a Macy's, for example, will see its CRM platforms as doing two things. One is about the long-term build and staging people through life cycles of purchases and seasons at a time, but they'll see the social and real-time data feeding and playing with their CRM systems as very much a short-term activation channel. And I think you have to kind of draw the distinction between what you're trying to do in terms of short-term effect, selling something today and in real time, as opposed to the long-term market effect. This is kind of an interesting thing, that when you're a brand owner, particularly when you don't control directly all of your channels of distribution, you have to maintain both of those things simultaneously.
Right. Let me shift to a question of demand-side platforms and agency technology and your use of technology and your view in particular of the rise of demand-side platforms and what it means for the ecosystems that you run. We had a pretty robust conversation about this, but I'm curious, just give me your first off the top of your head thoughts on DSPs.
Go ahead, Rob. You can start.
Me? Really?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead. I don't remember this conversation completely.
No, me neither.
Okay.
I'll prompt you, but
Yeah,
I'm not
okay.
going to
Yeah.
yet.
So I guess WPP made a transaction 3 years ago. We bought 24/7 Real Media. There's a number of implications of so doing that don't concern my day job, but some of them that do. The thing that does is the fact that in doing that, we hired more technologists in one go than we ever could have done before. And at that point, we had two choices as to what to do with those technologies. One of them was to build completely proprietary and closed systems, and the other was to use those technologies to build interfaces for our planning teams can use and to integrate in as open a way as possible all of the third-party systems, whether they were other DSPs or real-time bidding platforms, whatever, so that we could work with the best and be flexible in how we did that. That's the strategy we have. I think that the marketplace is far too early to call in any definitive way, and we'll continue to do that. So we, in this area, we've worked with Invite, we've worked with DataZoo, we've worked with MediaMath, and we see no conflict between doing that and our own strategy to collect all of our data in one place. We think that clients have built a level of trust with our business over time, and they're perhaps realizing that their data is the most single valuable piece of information in a negotiation in the pricing of media, would rather not give all of that data to a single third party with whom they don't have wider contractual relationships.
Who are you referring to?
It's a general remark, and I would never refer to anyone specifically.
Yeah, the intelligence really comes out. So actually, we use some of WPP's technology when we're sort of monitoring social, sort of in our platform to aggregate it all together. But the intelligence comes in when you actually look at the correlation between the data, right, and provide the insights. So it's really not necessarily as much about the platform. It's around whether or not you've got the analytical team that's working on behalf of the client to answer those intriguing questions that come out of the data that I think sometimes falls flat. So how is it interdependent? What happens if you're running, a TV spot, and what's happening to your lift, and why did that happen? And I think, as Rob said, looking at the best of breed that's there and swapping out those technologies that can actually go out and monitor things is the right thing to do, I believe, at this point, instead of building it on your own.
I think you're right. We have maybe around the world, extraordinary thought, there's 300 econometricians employed by GroupM around the world. We gather them together in a practice we refer to business science, and we've been building models for companies forever. So the whole notion that data is somehow new is wrong. We've been using data to predict the supply and demand of inventory for a long time. We've been using data to predict the outcomes in business of certain forms of deployment. And now what we're doing is we're taking data to append to certain kinds of media inventory to see if there's a differential value in one kind of inventory versus another. But at the heart of this, in our agencies and within our business science team, we're spending an awful lot of time in the same way that I talked about revenue events before. We're trying to work out what the data streams and events are that are most indicative of the health of a client's business and how that informs strategy and allocation. And the only thing that's happened is our ability to deploy against that data has got much faster. And there's some fascinating examples. We pitched a while ago unsuccessfully for the Home Depot. I mentioned it was unsuccessful, but we were looking at all of the data indicators that we might use to make allocation decisions. And the one that fascinated me most is we had a deal on the table to get every 24 hours a 1 meter resolution satellite image of all of the parking lots of Home Depot and Lowe's around the lower 48 states of the United States. And what was interesting about that was because we've got media that we can load up so much more quickly than we used to, suddenly that kind of data was applicable. But we're looking at a whole bunch of different data sets we haven't touched before.
Interesting.
We bought our own satellite as a result.
Did you?
Yeah.
We got a WPP bird.
WPP bird, and actually, yeah.
But this concept about optimization
That just got tweeted.
Yeah.
This concept of optimization and measurement is, new ground for the traditional agencies to go after. And it's essential to actually making sure that the media dollar, the value of the media dollar is spent well on behalf of the customer. Starting with the consumer insight. So if the consumer starts to behave differently, okay, what do you do with your media? How do you spend your media dollar? What kind of creative treatments do you use differently than you used to? It's not about one kind of creative placement anymore. You should have multiple ones, which actually goes back to the creative guys who aren't very happy about that, per se, because you know what? The statistics may bear out that the one that they like the best isn't the one that you should be running.
I mean, we have some interesting, I'm not going to talk specifically on examples, but we do know already that for certain of our clients, their Facebook friends are more valuable than people that aren't their Facebook friends. But interestingly, we know for some other clients, their Facebook friends are no more valuable than their other customers. And so we are trying to kind of take a very sort of, there's a very immediate kind of in the weeds real-time view of this, but there's also a more elevated view that we have to take at the same time.
Right. We're going to close today with Arthur Sulzberger from the New York Times, and I want to time shift you and pretend he's here on stage. What do you say to him? He's been quoted as saying, with regard to data-driven purchasing, with regard to particularly DSPs and ad exchanges and networks, he considers those a threat to premium publishers like the New York Times. What's your advice back to him on that comment?
New York Times has phenomenal content, right? So you're going to get users to get to the content. I mean, that's the first thing that has to be there. So, I mean, if most people don't even know that the video assets on the New York Times is better than actually what CNN has from a depth standpoint. So what I would say back to him is it's not necessarily about that, it's about the placement of those advertisements to engage the consumer in around his content, because the content is the draw.
Should he put his inventory into a supply-side platform and make it available to exchanges, networks, and DSPs? I mean, I know I'm asking you a question where you should say yes, because then I get it cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but I think he has some proprietary stuff that he can hold on to get the premium out of it.
And we might as well ask that on behalf of Hillary earlier with her, all the content. I mean, she's kind of playing on both sides.
So, I mean, obviously the first thing you tell him is to make sure you've still got Carla Slim on speed dial. That's the first thing you'd say to Arthur.
You guys Google Carla Slim New York Times if you don't get that joke.
That's certainly a very sound thing to do. I think that the New York Times is in this interesting kind of paradox. They now know that the journalism of the New York Times is consumed by more people in more places than it ever has been before, and we all know that story. I think they're very excited about platforms like iPad and the rest of the tablet market, and I think that's important. I think that the thing that fascinates me most about that, and I promise I'm going to answer your question when we get to this, is that between the newspaper and the iPad and their mobile properties, I think the Times has a different way of engaging with advertisers as well as its readers, of course, that it didn't have before. I think that mapping its assets against the short and long-term business needs of something like an AT&T is a client of mine. We've got a client who is building a big future platform out of Rethink Possible, but we've also got a client that is trying to nail new subscribers on a daily basis in more than 1,000 retail stores across the country. Now, what the Times can do is map against all of those business needs, and what they're fortunate in doing, because they've got one uncapped supply of inventory on the back end, mostly the web inventory of the New York Times. To me, if I was them, I'd be first looking at deploying it against those advertisers to help them deliver business results who were buying in a much kind of richer and deeper way with the newspaper. The difficulty is there's money flows going on here, there's a question of patience going on, and back to Carlos, you know, everyone's always known that newspapers have a hybrid funding model. They make some of their money out of cover price, they make some of their money out of advertising, but quite clearly what they've also had is proprietors who have fulfilled that kind of gap in the curve, if you like, in those times. And so the question is time. And I was told last week, I think the Times now has 500,000 people already, which is whatever it was at the time, a third of the entire iPad population that's going on there. And I see actually almost the rebirth of some kind of first mover advantage in that area. Yeah. And I think that if the Times is a winner in the kind of paradox of choice argument on iPad as a platform, they could be in a good place. Yeah.
No, I think the iPad actually gave some brands some lift here, whether it's Gilt or whether, you know, for first mover advantage.
Certainly gave Apple some lift.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Not that they needed it.
It's gone okay for them.
Yeah, I think it's been all right, as far as I can tell. Questions? Do we have questions? Just want to make sure I identify them. Here's one over here.
Hi.
Let us know who you are. Yeah, you're up.
Hi, sorry, Tina Basil from TweetUp. I just wanted to ask you, we've started to see PR firms getting very active in the social media space, and I'd love to hear your point of view on how that impacts that business for agencies, how you see the two coexisting.
Yeah, you know, it is interesting because we're actually partnering with some of the PR agencies in the Publicis network to figure out how we would actually put our offering out there. Because it first started out at Razorfish with, tell me what my social strategy should be, right? Then it's, what is my comprehensive plan? And now it's, will you help me monitor? Will you help me get a voice, my social voice for the brand? And the PR agencies can be really, really helpful with that. So we're starting to see that there's an extension there. And my belief is that they'll be hiring people in to help with social monitoring and word-of-mouth marketing. That's very much real time. Because you know the voice has to be very authentic. If your voice is not authentic, and there's tons of examples where it's not, your brand value goes down. So I think it's a pretty important space for the PR agencies to be getting in. And I think actually given sort of their crisis management mindset sometimes, I think they're probably well positioned to take over some of that chair.
Yeah, they've been the only corner of the marketing industry who's historically dealt with live and real-time communication. I mean, absolutely clearly. And to me, I mentioned before that we're in the message creation business, the message distribution business, and the message management business, and the PR companies are one of the few strands of our business that actually touch all of those. And increasingly for clients, we're seeing in the meetings that we have the PR guys at that table, and we're kind of super glad to have them.
Yeah, great. Do we have other questions here?
Hi, Don Springer from Collective Intellect. As you were talking about some of the technologies you're deploying to do the real-time monitoring and measurement, how much are your advertisers or end clients starting to bring IT and systems integrators into that conversation so they can do the plug-and-play element on their end as opposed to being led through your agencies or just people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It depends. It depends how their IT organization is set up. So you're talking about their own internal IT organizations, right? So when you start talking about cloud computing, you start talking about agile methodology, those are sacred cows sometimes that the internal IT organizations of these very large organizations will not touch. They get into security right away, there are roadblocks, you can't launch this, you can't do it. So a lot of the times we're actually experimenting, i.e. the experiment, right? And once that experiment then succeeds, we then actually push it into IT. And we get one or two advocates in the IT organization. But normally the CIO or the CTO is in the initial conversations to approve the experiment. And the experiment is you're going to go in your credit card and you're going to go hire Amazon to give me the production room that I need for this experiment. You're not going to go through the purchasing system to go and get this farmer servers. And as a CMO right now, that is a huge advantage for them because they can go out and they can go get marketing programs up and running faster than they ever have before. And that's only happened in the last 18 months. So it depends on how well the IT organization is knowledgeable about some of these new technologies. And I would say 95% of them are not there yet because they're trying to keep the train running. And they don't want their beepers going off on Saturday.
We have time for one more. Any other questions?
One at the top.
Oh, great, excellent. We've got a balcony question.
I'm not going to take it anymore.
Be careful up there.
So one of the questions is, it seems like agencies and brands seem to move slower to adopt innovative technologies. And normally, that's because people are fearful maybe about the backlash. So how do you move in the next couple of years as the rate of innovation accelerates? How do you guys move quicker to get there, as opposed to the groupthink where everybody runs to Facebook, everybody runs to Foursquare, and there's not that much innovation, there's much more groupthink.
Well, you have group in your name, so you have to answer that
right.
one.
So one of the ways I characterize GroupM is that we spend $80 billion a year of other people's money, and that's really important because it's other people's money, and the other people in this case tend to be our clients who are stewards of brands and their own employment. I'm really, really keen to take them with us wherever we go and not take them to places that they'll hurt themselves without full disclosure in the business. I couple that with a remark I made earlier about innovation at scale, and we look very, very hard, and sometimes not with the outcome that many of the people that come and sell to us would like, about whether or not there's genuine first mover advantage in something new, and if there is relatively low perceived first mover advantage and relatively high perceived risk to the reputation of either the client's company, his brand, or the client himself. No, we don't move as quickly as some people would like us to.
And now, this was actually my last question to both of you, which is, when you think about the question that was asked, and by the way, I just noticed there's mics on either side over there. Sorry, I should have told you that, but they're just down at the base of the stairs. Downstairs, we can't see. There's a ton of people up there, too. But is that you guys basically get to act as VCs and entrepreneurial funders of new ideas. In other words, you're saying you're looking at these companies, you look at Seth's Sticky Bits presentation or Avner, who's coming out after this to present Boxy, and you get to determine if you give the guy a 7-figure deal for a year-long program, you've just put that guy into business. Do you think about that? Do you realize that possibly could be competing with Silicon Valley VCs for innovation in terms of marketing-driven companies?
No, well, I think someone asked that question early on, like what keeps me up at night. I think that is really what keeps me up at night. It's like, how can we innovate just as fast as some of these Silicon Valley companies with new technologies and new ideas about how to reach consumers in different ways than what they can? Because they're in the garage sort of making these things up.
But then they want to come and they want you guys to write them a check.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, sometimes we do. I mean, because a lot of the times they're just starting to get off the ground.
Right.
So if you can help them experiment, and honestly, if I can end up getting the results for my client, then it's worth it. But I think, to Rob's point, it's a scale issue. A lot of these things are very, very small at this point.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we're primarily in the marketing outcomes business, not the Series B round business, and we have to be, isn't that the point of the venture capitalist? The object of the exercise, if you're an entrepreneur, is to catalyze enough enthusiasm for an idea in which the financial community that is far less risk averse, and quite rightly too in their particular case, need to be the bridge between that and value to advertisers. I don't think that's specifically our job, and I've very rarely heard a startup coming to me and saying, well, I've got $3 million of revenue, and that would be a good thing, but I've got $1 million of revenue. What I'd like you to do is to give me the other $1 million. And very few of them ever finish that sentence saying, and by the way, I'll give Unilever 30% of the company as a consequence. I don't know why that is, but
And they may sense that you don't want to take the paper.
maybe. It's not me, it's the client, it's their money, not mine.
Well, we have to stop it there. We're running a bit late, but please join me in thanking these two gentlemen for coming here today. That was great, Rob. Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you.
Yeah, great.